Cleveland boy. Started out, born 1974, grew up in Cleveland and throughout the 80s. Something that really hit me heavy and hard was the fact that during the 80s, I saw the crack epidemic pretty much eviscerate my entire neighborhoods all around me, families and schools. It really impacted me, but more importantly, it led me to believe that, man, there are people that are out here that have no way of earning a living, and they find themselves in a situation where they feel that they have to turn to the streets in order to earn a living. I'll fast forward and then come back to that. Moved to Tennessee in 2006. Was almost semi-retired. I was in the real estate business at that time and had done extremely well. And I moved to Tennessee because my mother lived here, and she had breast cancer. She was a survivor, and being the good son, I brought the grandkids down to Nashville so we could all be together. So the first time we came down to visit, she goes, "Oh, you got to come down and move." And I'm like, "Mom, it's just too country down here. We can't do it." She's like, "No, you got to come down and stay." So I came down a couple more times. I had a buddy of mine that went to TSU, and he's like, "No, you got to come down. Nashville's going to pop in about 5 years, and you should be here." I said, "Fine." I come down. I am involved in nothing but going to school. I'm getting my master's degree at Tennessee State University in educational administration and supervision. Thank you. So to go back to growing up in Ohio, it's just, I have so much that I want to tell you, but I have to kind of cram it into 15 minutes. I witnessed a lot. So when I ended up going back to school and I started learning about how many people were in school and college versus being in jail and imprisoned, and what that whole calculation looks like, I started coming across details and statistics that made me say, there's something going on here. So basically, the statistics read that 1 in every 31 Americans has a criminal record. That means that if I had the guy raise the lights and I asked you to raise your hand if you had one, I would be willing to bet that no one would raise their hand, right? That's the stigma that we have to work with when dealing with folks who are locked up, because when they get out, they don't want to have to live with that for the rest of their life, right? I began to study even further, and I had interned over at Metro Nashville Public Schools, and I started seeing young children who had parents that were incarcerated that would just come to school disheveled. And one particular day I was there, a young lady came in and she goes, "I'm hungry. Me and my mama slept in a car last night at the Wendy's because our grandmama put us out." And I just thought, wow, that's crazy to me. It's hard for you to wrap your mind around that when your lights are on and your heat is working and your fridge is full at home. So the way that the Lord works in my life, and I don't know about you, but I'll just tell you this. I used to go to church, right? Clapping, hey, praise Jesus. But I hadn't been, I hadn't been saved, right? So one day, I'm driving down Nolensville Road, and something clicks in my head that says, "Go to church, get baptized right now." I was like, man, that's crazy, because I'm on my way to a meeting. And it hits me again. It says, "You better make this left and go to your church and get saved right now." So I hit the blinker, and I went, and there was nobody there. It's the middle of the day. And if any of you hear people say, "Oh, speak in tongues," and it never happens to me that way. It's just a voice inside my body that I know does not belong to me. And the voice says, "All right, you did what you had to do, go to your meeting." So I'm thinking, man, that was strange. And I told my wife, and she's like, "Yeah, I don't know what's coming next." So this is what's coming next. And this is the kicker. I'm sleeping one day, and I jump up, and my wife was like, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "I just had a dream. I'm at a picnic. Some little girl comes up to me and says, 'Mister, you have a felony.'" And I was like, "What am I supposed to do with that?" She goes, "Pray on it." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." May 10th was the day that I got a phone call from a guy who used to cut grass at one of my properties when I was in real estate. He says, "Hey, man, how you doing?" I said, "I'm great." He goes, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." He goes, "Well, are you sure you're fine? Are you sitting down?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sitting down. What's going on?" He goes, "Man, go online." I said, "For what?" He goes, "You just got indicted." I said, "Indicted? What do you mean? Like, what does that mean?" So my fingers can't type fast enough. It's like dialing 911. I'm trying to figure out what he's talking about. And I pull up this litany of all of this, I call it garbage now because it's over, but it was information about how A particular criminal organization in Ohio was running loans, and there were several mortgage companies. I happened to own one of the mortgage companies. And I'll say this for the record because my wife always tells me I forget. I didn't do anything wrong, right? But I'm going to tell you that the Lord placed this in my life because it became my internship into the criminal justice system. I'm a businessman. I own a local company. It's called Entertainment Delivery Systems. We build and deliver educational platforms for inmates in jails and prisons. It didn't start out that way. It started out me thinking, wow, inmates don't have anything to do all day. Maybe we could sell them music and MP3 players. And didn't work out that way. So what I basically found was, and I'll go through all the statistics here. My children, when I ran this by them, said it was boring, so I'll wait. I ended up figuring out that I was highly likely to go to prison because I was black. I was even more highly likely to go to prison because I had resources. And some people out there didn't necessarily believe that I deserved them, even though I worked really hard for them. And I'll tell you this, by the time I was 30, I was a millionaire on paper because I just believed in working that hard. I worked incessantly. I didn't have children until my late 20s, and that was on purpose. But let's go forward a bit more. I have to go up north to get booked. I didn't know what that meant. So I'm sitting there, my heart is pounding, I'm sweating. You know, all this stuff, it hits you. It's like a rock. Like, you're not expecting this, especially when you're a law-abiding citizen for your entire life. I go up before the judge. They say gibberish. Next thing I know, you know, my lawyer's like, I'll see you later. And I'm like, well, I thought I was leaving with you. And he's like, no, you got to go to that door. So I go in that door because you have to get fingerprinted and all of that. And I'm telling you, it was like 12 guys in a room about the size of that hole in the D, right? It's that small, and there's one light bulb, probably about a 20 watt, something you put in your oven. But right under that light, it read, Jesus saves. And I was like, wow. And then a guy goes to the bathroom in the open toilet, and I hear somebody say this, and you can bleep this out. I hear somebody scream, nuts to butts. And I'm thinking, what did he say? And the guy next to me is like, line up, we have to go. And I'm like, well, where are we going? He's like, I don't work here. I don't know. I mean, we have to. But that's just me being a bookworm, right? Like, I've never been through anything like this. So I end up, we're on an elevator, literally, as the man said we should be. And we go and we get fingerprinted, and I'm telling you, I sat in that cell waiting for a bondsman who apparently took lunch, got his nails done. I mean, he did a lot before he came to get me. So the rule is, if you're there past 4 o'clock, you have to dress out. Dress out meaning you have to stay for the night. And I was like, man, I really don't want to stay here. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of uneducated, very hungry people that probably are taking advantage of what very little they have, and they're still coming up short. So I started studying even more. This is the first day of my internship, right? I get back home after that's over, and I tell my wife, I said, man, that little girl was right. I might be going to prison, and I might have a felony. And I said, but I don't believe that's what the Lord wants me to do, right? I'm a successful business owner. I've gotten my master's degree. I'm working on my doctorate by this point, because if all of you can follow the timeline, this is around 08, 09. You can't get a loan for anything. Market's locked up. The only thing you can get a loan for is a student loan, right? So I'm thinking, well, you know what? There's no time like the present. I got no money coming in. There's no prospect of anything. Let me go back to school and get my doctorate. So I start researching even further. And I started coming across statistics. The American prison system costs each of us a total of $63 billion a year. Every state has its own budget. There's a federal budget. Every county has a budget for it. It's something that people are willing to pay for when they're lawmakers, apparently. There are about over 7 million people in the U.S. justice system. Free rent, You don't want to be there, but sometimes maybe that's better than where you came from. You don't pay taxes, and you get free health care. That's not a bad gig, right? This is something that I always show because it would appear to be a pristine vacation spot, but this is actually Alcatraz prison. It's funny how you can shade things to make them look like what you want, right? How does this happen? Typically what I find for someone who has been locked up, and I've actually done research, so I'm not just spouting this off. If anybody wants the slide deck, it has all of the sources and resources in the notes section. I'd be happy to forward it to you. Lack of education leads to lack of employment opportunity, which ultimately leads to poverty. Poverty always leads to, and I'm saying always because you can include alcohol in this, drugs are always the most readily available resource in the hood. What you'll find is it basically, you know how you see the tornado commercials and they shoot the 2x4 through the wall? That's what drugs will do to your home. And I've seen it happen. I had a friend of mine, his name was Aubrey George. Met Aubrey in the 11th grade. Aubrey's about 6'3", 250 back then. He really a great guy, great personality. Aubrey comes up to me one day, he says, man, I'm quitting school. I said, well, why are you quitting? He goes, I'm gonna go start a business with my brother. Oh, okay. I said, I have other friends that own businesses and family businesses. I said, well, what are you gonna do? He goes, well, my brother's a drug dealer, I'm gonna start selling drugs with him. And I'm like, Aubrey, that's not something you wanna do. He goes, well, it's the only thing we can do. So I go home with him after school, we ride the bus, and I go to his house. He has no food in his refrigerator. The lights are off. So I hit the switch, he goes, no, the lights are off. And I think, wow. He goes, but I'm hungry, and I figured something out, I'm gonna go do this. Come with me. So I'm thinking, okay. Now mind you, the Lord has always put me in these situations where I can witness this. He goes to the store, he buys a box of $10 lemon heads, he sucks one of them from yellow to white, and he goes back out on the corner and he sells it to someone as though it's crack. He gets the $10. We're about 15 at this point. He gets the $10. He goes back to the grocery store. He buys a bag of Roman meal bread and some lunch meat and some milk, and he takes it home. And those are the groceries for he and his brother for that week. Aubrey eventually went to jail several times, I'm sure you can imagine. What I'd like to point out here on this particular slide is this incline from 1980 to the year 2010. America basically grew an appetite for incarceration. You can see there's a 500% growth of the incarcerated population over this period. Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, which was something that came out of the 1970s when dealing with the mafia, was really placed on inner city drug use and drug distribution at that point. Again, I'll share. America holds 5% of the world's population, yet we hold 25% of the world's prisoners. There are over 7 million people under U.S. correctional supervision. That means those that are locked up, those that are on probation, those that are on parole, those that are on community supervision. At the current pace, there will be over 10 million people locked up by 2021. And I always give this for reference. Australia has 18 million residents. So that means we're on our way to some pretty drastic numbers here. This is a long-term taxpayer expense. Of the federal level inmates, there are about 210,000 that are locked up. 87% of these folks will stay more than 3 years. As you can look at the graph here in the middle, most of them will stay somewhere around 5 years, 5 to 10. I'll go back to my first point. Why are these guys here? If you look at the highest offense here, it's drug offenses. Half of the people locked up at the federal level are in there for drugs. And if you go over to this side, you'll see, as a security level, the majority of them are medium, low, or minimum security. These aren't violent folks. These are folks that committed a crime, that deserve to be locked up. But I'm going to ask you today to change the way that you think about what we should do next. The average cost of an inmate per year, according to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics, is $31,286. Multiply that by the 5-year average that I just showed you. Comes out to $156. Can anybody give me a guess as to what it takes to educate a child from grades 1 through 12? Let's take a guess. Throw it out. 151. It costs more to house somebody for 5 years than it does to properly educate a child, grades 1 through 12. Does that shock anybody? Yes. No. Impact of education on recidivism. I want to tell you that if you educate someone, you give them the tool to go out and earn a living. National average is 76.6%. over 5 years. That means that 76%, almost 77% are returning within 5. Go to 3 years, it's 67.8. There's not that big of a difference there, is there? No. That means to me that there's no rehabilitation here. Everybody thinks somebody should go to prison and they should be punished. But this is telling you that they're going to come out. And if they didn't learn anything the last time they were in there, what are they going to do? I guarantee you they're going back. You give someone an associate's degree, what happens? Recidivism falls to 13.7. Give them a bachelor's degree, falls to 5.6. Give them a master's degree, guess what? They're not going back to prison. I won't say ever, because there's white-collar criminals. Thank you. So my purpose, I've kind of laid it out, but I'll go back to my research. Did a research project with Davidson County Sheriff's Office. Thank you to Sheriff Hall, LaWanda Page, and Chief Wilkes. This was my dissertation work. I wanted to figure out why inmates did not participate in GED programming while incarcerated. The top reasons were poor previous school experience, lack of family support. They didn't really feel like a GED would help them gain employment upon release. And lastly, they couldn't find consistent access to a learning environment. When you're locked in a cell, you can't move. And I only knew that because I was locked in a cell and I couldn't move for a whole day, right? I couldn't call my mom. I couldn't call anybody. I just had to sit there and wait. What we found was that maybe instead of moving an inmate to a classroom, maybe we could put all of those educational materials onto a tablet and send the tablet to the cell, thus allowing an inmate to have an increased time on task in addition to all of the free material that we now have online. Now, you also have to remember between 2008 and 2012, what was the biggest technological innovation that hit the market? iPad. Now, I was born in 1974, which to my children is the same thing as saying 1874, right? So if you think about the digital revolution and the age, we really haven't had this technology longer than 10, 15 years, period. You know, my kid saw a box of VHS tapes in the garage the other day. Well, it was probably about last summer. And they were asking me, like, are they building blocks? And I was like, no, there's, you put them in a machine and it plays a movie. And they were like, what? And I was like, never mind. So in trying to figure out how to better educate inmates, again, we have the premise that we can increase time on task along with the volume of educational material for these inmates to study in their cells. There's a BEST program in Tennessee Department of Corrections. BEST program stands for Building Entrepreneur Success in Tennessee. Forget about all of the degrees that I just told you about that would limit or reduce recidivism. By putting an inmate through an entrepreneurial course, there's one that, it's called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program out of Texas. It's a 1-year program, 2-year program. By the time these guys get out, their recidivism falls to 7%. So we're trying to replicate that here in Tennessee through the BEST program. What we're doing now, we will probably be the largest deployer of tablet PCs in the correctional business, period. We're based right here in Nashville, and it's something that we've worked very, very hard to do. What we want to do is focus on a study that just came out last year by the RAND Corp. What about the money? For every $1 spent on correctional education, we can save $5 as a society on reduced recidivism. Does that make sense? Is that something that we should be thinking about at least? I just read an article this week, and I may want them as a client, so I'm not going to talk too bad about them, but state of Pennsylvania just this week chose to bypass a $300 million request for new schools, yet they greenlit $400 million for 2 new prisons. That should outrage you as citizens, even though you don't live there. Because what that means is it's okay. It's okay for us to reduce money going to K-12 while we increase money for jails and prisons. Power of education. This is my last slide, and then I'll let you guys go. Thank you. My friend Aubrey, my dear friend Aubrey, was a great guy. Had I stayed with Aubrey, because we were the best of friends in the 10th and 11th grade, I would be dead today. I make no qualms about that. Education literally saved my life. I had always chosen to go to school. I'm going to tell you that there was a deciding day, and I call it the tale of 2 chemists. End of the day comes, Aubrey says, hey, why don't you come over to my house? My brother, he just got in a shipment. I'm going to show you how to cook crack. And I was like, Aubrey, that's not really something I want to do today. right? But he's my friend. So peer pressure says that I'm probably gonna go. And I'm telling you this to watch your kids, because my dad was a cop, and that wasn't a determining factor, right? There was a pencil partner with our school, and it was British Petroleum. So they had one of their people come over, and that same day he says, hey, why don't you come over to the lab, and I'll show you how we cook catalyst to control the burning rate of gasoline. And I was like, man, that sounds like that would be fun. And I ended up going to BP that day. And from that experience, I was offered a full ride scholarship to Cleveland State University for chemical engineering, something I didn't take up, but, it just didn't happen for me. It wasn't interesting when I got there. But anyway, had I stayed with Arbery, there's no doubt that I would have eventually turned to the drug trade. Facebook comes out 02, 03. I'm looking for Arbery because this is the thing, find everybody you used to know. And I can't find him. And I'm saying, well, if he was going to sell crack forever, I'm looking in the wrong place. I should go to the criminal courts clerk, right? And look him up there. And I end up looking him up, but this is what I find. The court being notified of the death of the defendant, right? He's dead. I had no idea. But I know that if it wasn't for me going to BP, going to college, going into business for myself, I probably would have had the same case with him, and I probably would have been dead with him. All I'm telling you today is, in closing, is that it costs us far less money to teach an entrepreneur how to sell a legal product rather than an illegal product. We're spending money, $63 billion a year, to punish and not rehabilitate. Thank you.